Hello everyone, this is Krazy, aka Why Must I Sign In? I don't know why I keep saying that, I'm also the Crazy Cat, I have so many names. Terrible brand identity. Anyway, uh, for today I want to start off by just reviewing Alliance War. I have interesting feelings about this set. It's been out now for uh, almost a week, so the meta is still pretty fresh, but I've also been playing pretty heavily. I was rank 12 and I managed to get up to legend in the last week, so I have been enjoying the state of the game right now. I feel like it's pretty versatile. Um, I feel like the main strength of where the game is right now and the main problem, I guess you could say, is the same thing, which is that basically your top tier decks can still very easily be the decks that you were playing a year ago. Right. This is a Lalu deck that I ended up playing with a little bit to clear rank 5. I tried to do each rank with a different deck. Um, And for me, the main question here was whether I was cutting Ash Berserker or a few other cards. I put in like Jim Stacy and Eclipse Baroness for fun, but that's probably wrong. I think Ash Berserker is probably still better, although Eclipse Baroness is pretty nice. I mean, the difference in value between the two cards is quite debatable because you get the cost reduction with Eclipse Baroness, whereas Ash Berserker, like realistically, you're very rarely playing him on 4, right? You generally need your Haunted Manor up, and then you would need something else. I mean, he was a lot easier to play when you had 4 attack, because then all you needed was 1 Divine Fervor to get the activation. Now you pretty much have to have one of your Haunted Manors up. And one of the main issues with Lalu is that because of the new archetypes having a lot of favor for support removal, not actually to deal with Lalu, but actually I think to deal with combo Slay decks, that you will sometimes end up losing to control decks just by them killing all your support before you can actually generate lethal. Um, but I do like Spawn Mother and Polywog, but the thing about it is that there's almost nothing, I think, from the new set in a deck like this, right? Like if you're running like a pure Lalu, and this is 3 different colors, then there's really just not a lot here. Like a lot of this set is consistently value oriented, which means it's not really aggro oriented. Um, and so like you could run Lyris Titanborn, like over Elena. Sure, that's actually pretty reasonable, but Elena actually, I don't know. She'll remove a big guard, which will often let you generate lethal that turn, whereas Lyris, you might put her on the board and then she just gets removed before she does anything. You know, sometimes you actually want that immediate effect. In yellow, right, I mean, in all of red, I'm really just struggling to see anything that's actually really consistently playable. Like, it's kind of funny to think of it. I've seen people running Covenant Plate and in Battle Mage decks a little bit. I keep expecting to see a Fighters Guild Berserker in an Expertise combo deck, but I actually haven't seen it on the board played yet. I tried to run Pact Shield Bearer once, but it's really just, you know, you compare Pact Shield Bearer to your other option for the much more consistent and much stronger effect of Withered Hand Cultist, right? I mean, you're just pretty much always going to run Withered Hand Cultist over it, because in that archetype, you don't, like, the only reason you would even consider running Pack Shield Bearer is if you wanted to run some actions too, right? Like, the thing about Withered Hand Cultist is it does affect your own actions, but, like, making it be Veteran means that it will very frequently be removed, and the whole point of running a card like this is, that you're preventing your opponent from using actions to remove your creatures. So that it can be removed before its activation takes effect makes it way worse than Withered Hand Cultist. And that's kind of like how I feel about a lot of these cards. Like, I kind of looked at Fighters Guild Elite, I'm like, with the combo card, not in this, you can't do it in Lawler. With Master of Incunabula, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, then yeah, like, conceivably Fighters Guild Elite could be playable, but I have yet to see that deck actually work, and I don't think it would be consistent enough to really be very strong. So I've seen, like, Orsinium Forge, like, played once. I think this is actually probably okay in Battle Mage. I think this is okay in Battle Mage. I think Covenant Plate is maybe okay in Battle Mage, Prophecy Battle Mage particularly, because of the Prophecy tag, the item, and the Mobilize makes it, I think, probably one of the more playable cards. And, like, maybe Lyris. I've seen Lyris thrown on the board a few times, but I haven't really seen her winning games. Like, if you're reliant on this effect to break opponent runes, then you're probably in a bad place on the board already. So I feel like there's maybe 3 playable cards in red. Blue, I feel, is slightly better off. Altmer Flameslinger is possibly, like, in terms of just raw value, like, one of the best cards of this expansion. She's extremely playable. She's very strong. She works with everything. She does exactly what you want her to do, other than also be Wardcrafter at the same time. Like, I mean, she's competing with Wardcrafter for that slot, basically, right? Like, but you can run her with Wardcrafter, and you probably will be. So it's not really a competition in that respect. Instead, it's kind of fighting for the place of Harpy almost. I've seen people run Forked Bolt occasionally in certain archetypes, so I think it's playable. I don't think it's super strong, but it's fine. I haven't really seen Channeled Storm. Like, even if you're running Flamesinger and doing this archetype, I still don't really think Channeled Storm is all that good, because it's just a single target for the same cost of your other option, which is just to do 3 damage to all the things, which is going to be so much better against tokens. Sorry, there it was. Of Reverberating Strike, right? Like, you want a 3-cost removal, you're going to run Reverberating Strike almost every time, because it's a lot less conditional, and it's going to sweep, tokens, which is one of the main threats you're trying to deal with, right? So I don't think that's all that good. So 2 playable cards on this page. Imrik's Warlord. I saw Imrik's Warlord actually get played in one deck. I don't really recall if it ended up winning, but I think it's something that you can have fun with experimenting with. I don't think it'll end up being a tier 1 Battle Mage, item Battle Mage necessity, but it certainly seems like it'll be okay. So I think blue has some pretty playable cards. I haven't really seen this guy work out too many people. I think Vanessa's Scribe in the Expertise deck, again, also running, like, Master of Incunabula, is actually fine. You get the value out of it by running the cards that generate random actions, and then you really need the value and the cost reduction consistently. So I think that's actually basically fine. You're generally running, like, enough actions that it's worth it. I've seen Telekinesis used as basically like a runoff finishers. That seems fine. I don't think I've seen Lion Guard armaments except by random generation, but still, as part of random generation, it's fine. I don't think it's usually run in the base deck, though. I don't think I've really seen Smarts. Like, I'm sure that with the support, the pirate support, that it seems like it should do good, but I have yet to actually see it really be played. Near Aid Sister, like, I've played with a few keyword decks. I think they're actually pretty decent. Do I still have one? Yeah. Here's a deck, but I ended up not actually running Murade Sister just because, like, there's a lot of things this deck wants to do. Um, like, you definitely want the consistent drain and all that, and you're already running Manic Jack. So Near competing with Cliff Racer, who will always have that charge, right? Like what you want in that slot is either the charge or the Hex Mage damage, right? So ultimately, I think Near Sister is. I have seen it played a few times, but it generally doesn't do. It's not usually the reason the deck is winning. That deck can win though, just not necessarily because of this card. Soul Shred is the bane of Arena because Arena has so many fewer cards that it has a much bigger impact. But I've had it played against me in Constructed, and I have tried at great length to actually make it work in Constructed, and it basically is just irrelevant. Uh, where it is playable is in a tribunal control mirror match, and even then, it's not really necessary. You will probably win a tribunal control mirror match based on gaining a dominating position on the board and your opponent finally running out of removals, even though I know it takes forever. And actually, I just don't see the games going to fatigue. So unless you really just happen to banish the Parthenox or whatever, it's not going to make a difference. It's not really going to win you the game. So I've tried to make this card work, and I think it's still obviously very strong in Arena. But I think Control just doesn't really want to go that route. Staff of Ice is interesting. I actually was trying to make it work in, where was it? I think I was trying to do it in Daggerfall, right? Because if you're in Daggerfall, then you don't have access to Archer's Gambit. So I was like, is there any way that Staff of Ice can make do, in addition to Quicksilver Crossbow, for Falkreath Defiler and Night Talon Lord? The problem is that Staff of Ice is just so expensive that you will have some ramp in this deck, but there will be a lot of games where you just are never going to have the 14 mana necessary to do Night Talon Lord plus Staff of Ice. A lot of the time you need Night Talon Lord and him doing his combos earlier, right? So unless you have Squish the Wimpy, which is, obviously the most important and the most consistent combo piece in basically all of the new combo decks, right? And this is not, unfortunately, this is an Isle of Madness card, and I think it's probably the most important Isle of Madness card, but it is not actually from Alliance War. I kind of feel like the most important card in Alliance War is not in Alliance War. It's kind of funny how that works out. So I feel like there's a lot that can be said about blue. I do think it has a fair number of playable cards. But and so I think that blue ended up, I think these cards are fine. A lot more playable than red, which I really just have not seen a lot of people making work. Here, I feel like these 5 cards are all basically irrelevant. Alchemy, it's just not necessary. Like, I've tried to run support archetype decks, and ultimately the other support cards, I don't know how else to say that, but basically so long as Tower Alchemist and Cauldron Keeper are playable, Alchemy just is not necessary. It's too much of the same thing, and it does it less effectively and less consistently, which makes it worse. Mystic of the Ancient Rites, I've seen people try to make work with Wish, but it seems like a lot of work for not a lot of reward. Hey, Walleye, how you doing? Um, I've seen people try to do Renowned Instructor. I feel like this is kind of expensive for what it wants to do. Um, and I feel like in tokens, you aren't necessarily playing actions every single turn, which makes it kind of inconsistent for a 3-drop. But it's kind of in that iffy, okay range. Guildsworn Revitalizer is probably the strongest. Oh yeah, I should have said something about Abner Tharn, but I just haven't played him that much yet. But I don't really think he's necessary either. Forward Camp seems terrible. Grey Viper Brigand is like kind of okay, but also just a little bit slow. He's just not good enough. You're not going to play multiple Grey Viper Brigands enough to get the card draw reward to make it really worth it. But Guildsworn Revitalizer in combination with Master of Incunabala, so like just in this one archetype, seems pretty good. Obviously, you don't really have a reason to run her in another deck. And that's kind of where I'm like, I feel like it's weird that red didn't really get like a good 2-drop. Like Pact Oathman seems like it should be good, but it basically isn't. Like I keep looking at Ebon Thread Cloak, but I feel like there's just too many other ways to remove creatures other than actions that it won't be good enough consistently. So I think that's why red feels like it just doesn't have as many new interesting cards. Legion Zero Templar seems fine. I think that if Hive Defender for some reason stops seeing play, it would be a lot better. But right now I feel like it loses its spot to Hive Defender if you're running a card like this, which just seems just not quite good enough. Guildsworn Cavalier is interesting. I mean, obviously, like, what it's really competing with in terms of that slot is with Divine Fervor, right? You just throw the support, it has that immediate effect the turn it's played. The difference being that if Divine Fervor is destroyed, that the effect goes away. The problem being that you know, it's a turn off then, right? Because the expertise has to activate when you're playing an action item or support. So it, you know, basically doing something to get the benefit of Divine Fervor, but having to do something else to activate it, I feel like to me makes this card worse than Divine Fervor, which means that it basically doesn't get run. But it's like right at that point where it's like almost really good. So I don't want to say it's unplayable. I feel like I haven't seen Bruma played. I haven't really seen Strategist Map played. I feel like Varen is a trap. He's just a terrible, terrible card that no one should run. I mean, the stat line is fine. Like, if you just 1 of 4/6, but I mean, if people are beating your face in, then you probably will need, like, a Prophecy Jab, right? Like, I feel like this is not the solution for aggro. Like 5 life per rune is you're probably gonna die anyway. At that point, you're gonna run out of value. I feel like I've not seen this play, and I don't know why you would want a forked bolt and an improvised weapon for 5 with the requirement that you have 2 other colors on the board. That just seems really way too conditional for way too little payoff. This seemed really good at first until I actually read it and realized that if your opponent plays an action, they can just switch it back unless you silence or destroy it immediately, which makes this like no one has. I've not seen this card played once. So basically, in yellow, the only consistently playable card seems to be Guildsworn Revitalizer with Master of the Incunabala. And everything else in yellow from this set seems pretty weak. Just not quite good enough. Which is kind of how I feel about red, except red doesn't even have, like, the good 2-drop. It just has, like, Covenant Plate in, like, 1 specific deck and 2 kind of, like, quasi-tech cards. Feels like just not a lot of impact in those 2 colors. I feel like blue had a lot of impact from this expansion, and red and yellow just did not. Yellow, I've seen a lot of people try to make Bandari Opportunist work. It feels like it's like in that niche where it like really wants to work, and it probably should work, but I haven't actually seen the decks be that good yet, firsthand anyway. I feel like there probably is a deck that can make this guy work though. Dominion Oathman, interestingly, not being run in uh, in Guildsworn, but actually just running Dominion Oathman in Assassin, just saying I want a 2/2 for 1 that does 2 face damage is fine, right? Just straight up aggro face damage Assassin decks is the one running this, and just ignoring the drain because who cares? You're not winning from drain with this card. I mean, Guildsworn like might also run it if you're like an aggro Guildsworn deck. It's like a nice perk, but really what you want if you're running this card is the face damage most of the time. Inspiring Soldier is interesting enough that I haven't actually decided how I feel about it. Mostly because I don't feel like I've seen like just a ton of, like if you're doing tokens, you're probably in Monk, and I feel like I haven't been seeing a lot of Monk token decks lately. So I just haven't seen this card played a lot because I don't think the deck has been played, but tokens will just continue to be good. And as a 2-drop that makes another dude, this seems basically fine. You know, like you compare it to Bruma, which is, you know, the other 3/2 for 2 that is run in a token aggro deck. I'll say, yeah, I would definitely at least consider playing Inspiring Soldier over Bruma. You'd think about it. So if you're thinking about it, that means it's pretty good. I've seen people try to make Dunmer Tyro work, and he's like kind of okay. You know, he goes and pings face for 1 and then sits there as a 3/4, but generally I feel like this deck has other things they want to run over this guy, but he's just not really that good. Like this is supposed to be an activator for things like Wish, but Wish isn't good enough to justify running Dunmer Tyro, so you're not going to be able to play them the same turn most of the time anyway. I feel like this is just way too slow of removal, so I have not seen it played. I don't think I've really seen Shadowscale Hunter played basically at all. I feel like, you know, move decks usually want a little bit more of an immediate impact. I know that there must be some sort of deck that runs Unrelenting Siege, but usually tokens you want Divine Fervor, so I don't know why you'd be running Unrelenting Siege when you would just run Divine Fervor instead, personally. It seems like Fervor is just much better. Haven't seen Beetle played yet, although, yeah, I don't know, for a 2/2 that just plays another Prophecy. Actually, this is a card I kind of want to experiment with now that I look at it again. But I haven't actually seen it played yet, so it's still not just really that good. Dater Titan is one of those cards that's like great in Arena, and I have not seen in Constructed. Spoils of War, I think, ends up being the most... Actually, Dominion Oathman is pretty strong. I think I've seen Oathman played slightly more. There's a lot of decks trying to make Spoils of War work, though. I think that drawing 2 cards is always going to have people, you know, thinking about, you know, is this the draw mechanic I want? And especially in like Market Archer, Spoils of War is definitely getting played, and Market Archer is a pretty good deck. Debilitate has seen some play in control decks, but not that much. Sai Sahan is actually the card I have most played out of green from this expansion. Where is it? I ran at rank 3. This is actually, I believe, the only card from the new expansion I was running was Sai Sahan. Because the 6 damage is really significant, and this is just an archetype I've generally enjoyed playing. You know, you put Shearpoint Dragon, and then Sai Sahan is basically like, you know, a leveled up Drain Vitality, right? It's crazy. But he's also a 6/3 on the board that is immune to every creature wounded by him. Like, he gets removed most of the time, but a lot of the time you just, you're retaking the board with his activation. And with so many, like, low damage lethal creatures in the combo decks, this archetype is, like, a lot stronger than you might think it is right now, particularly based on the meta. So I think this is the first card from the expansion I actually got really excited about. And it's really worked out for me too. I think it's a really strong card. Overall, green, I think, got some playable cards. Dominion Oathman, maybe Inspiring Soldier, Spoils of War. Much better off than green or yellow in terms of... I think blue and green got some of the biggest benefits from this expansion, and red and yellow got kind of the least. Purple. Squire, I have not seen played significantly. Hush, I've seen played like once. Yeah, it's kind of a confusing card to me, because I guess people want to play for the prophecy tag over suppress for an extra 1 mana, which just, I don't know. I've played a lot of purple. Look at these decks: Meme Highlander, Tribunal Greed, Ebon Control, Daggerfall, more Ebon Control, Token Spell Sword, Mid Sork, Debuff Scout. Even in the Debuff Scout, I was not running Hush, but I have seen people play it, so it's getting played by someone. I don't think it's that good personally. Cruel Axe is basically unplayable. Imperial Lackey. I don't know. I might look at it again if I go back to Spell Sword tokens, but I've played Spell Sword tokens, and having more things that require things to be in multiple lanes. Do you want Imperial Lackey or you want your Lion? And I think most of the time you'd want the Lion, because you're going to be in Spell Sword, right? Like, that's the deck you would run this in. Poison Dagger, I think, is actually not as bad as it might seem at a glance, because lethal activations right now are really significant. I don't think you're very likely to run it as more than a one-off. But compared to Daedric Dagger, it seems a lot better, right? I think it's, strictly speaking, better than Daedric Dagger. And so Poison Dagger in your Ebon Control decks, I don't actually end up running it personally, though, right? Like, it's competing against Aldvallathi Assassin, Barrow Stalker, right? There's so many 2-drops you want to run, and you can't. Right, you want your Sword of the Inferno. Like, the really appealing part of Poison Dagger is the Mobilize, that you can just throw it as a 2/1 lethal on the board that you can then use to activate any other combo. The problem is that what other minion do you equip it on, right? You could be using it on Falkreath Defiler, but that means that now your combo requires 3 cards rather than 2, right? Like, usually when you're activating Falkreath Defiler, really your ideal is going to be in combination with Squish the Wimpy, right? Like, this is going to be the most consistent 6 mana, deal 3 damage to something to get the activation on the board. And that's usually going to be what you want, and it's going to be enough. With Poison Dagger, you're going to turn into the issue of Sword of the Inferno, where it's nice that you can now get rid of big minions, but I feel like Ebon Control already has a lot of tools for big minions, right? You already have so much lethal. You have Aldvallathi, you have Fighter's Guild, Recruit. I mean, of course, you're running things like Arshine Venom Tongue, because that's one of the main reasons you're even in this deck, is to get that activation off. I like to run Territorial Viper. I'm running a Lena. I think most decks are running a Lena at this point. So if you're running Ebon Control, like, Poison Dagger seems like it really should fit in very easily, right? Like, but the problem is, Night Talon Lord, usually you still just want to do Squish the Wimpy, because at that point, a lot of the time, your control deck. You just need the drain, especially against aggro decks. So I feel like Poison Dagger should be good. I feel like it can work. I feel like if you feel like it works, that you should put it in. But I think this is the deck you would run it in if you're going to run this card. And I'm not running it in this deck. So what you going to do? Just this seems like a meme card to me. Like, yeah, 3 for 5 if you can ever get it off is great, but you have to already have your veteran creatures have charge guy on the board, which means, you know, you are required to have your 4-drop on the board before you're playing your 3-drop, because otherwise this just gets removed like every single time, right? So it doesn't really seem that good. Empire Oathman in token decks, great. It's a great card. Probably one of the stronger cards of the expansion, actually, because tokens are so strong right now. I feel like there's just, you know, you want to really win games quickly, especially if you're in like ranks 12 to 4. Like anywhere in there you want to climb, you're probably going to be running like a token aggro deck, which means you could very seriously consider running Empire Oathman if that's the archetype you want, if that's the colors you want to be in for your tokens. Yeah, I haven't really messed around with Banelord. Manny Marco, I keep trying to make work. The problem is that like you're already right now probably, you know, if you're running in like a control archetype, you're probably doing like a combo deck with Night Talon Lord, which means Manny Marco feels a little bit redundant. And then if you're not in Evan, then you're going to be in yellow. And if you're in yellow, you probably just want Marak. And if you're not in yellow, then you have blue. And if you're in blue, there's a pretty good chance you're running something like Memory Wraith. And if you're running Memory Wraith, it's not going to be as consistent to really have anything to pull for Manny Marco. So I've tried running him a few times. I think he's certainly playable. You know, like every now and then there's going to be like a Marak in your opponent's graveyard and you're just going to win the game immediately with Manny Marco, which is great when it happens. But I feel like overall it's kind of hard to fit him in a deck. So then we get into the main things, which is the new tricolors, right? Like the whole appeal of this expansion really was the new colors. I think Guildsworn is actually pretty popular. I think that this expertise archetype is not really the only reason you would be in this archetype. Guildsworn Apprentice is really just an extremely playable card. It's going to fit into basically every single Guildsworn deck. Like, it's just, why are you in Guildsworn? So you can run Guildsworn Apprentice and have your Prophecy Guard 1/2 that draws a card, right? Like, it's going to fit into token decks, it's going to fit into control decks, it just is in every deck. So this is like the reason you play Guildsworn. Empire Recruiter is like great for your Cyrodiil token aggro decks. I actually haven't seen Daggerfall Phantom played that much. I think Daggerfall isn't like as heavy on items as it seems like it would be on paper. So I think that you can think about it, but I was like, I don't know. I've like been running some Daggerfall decks. Yeah, see, here's where I actually tried running the Poison Dagger, and I haven't actually had that much luck with it. But even here, I was like, yeah, there's so many other 2-drops it's competing with, you know, like competing with Barrow Stalker. Like, yeah, you want the items back. Like, sure, it'd be nice to be able to just use a Sword of Inferno and get rid of something if you need to, and have the Sword of Inferno in your hand, but it makes it less playable on 2. And I feel like there's just not, you know, a lot of the time you want your items in combination with your combo creatures, you know, like Falkreath Defiler. Like, you don't want to just be using them for removal. So, not actually that great. Especially because it's so susceptible to silence, which there's a fair amount of right now. Why does it reset that? Okay, here we go. So great, great. Dominion Battle Reeve is also great. Probably very strong card. 3/3 terrain that has this like all this ping damage and this last gasp extra life gain. It's great. Definitely, if you're running Dominion, you're running Dominion Battle Reeve. Forerunner of the Pact. I don't think the most popular decks are actually running this. I have seen it run. Obviously, if you're running like a mid-range creatures on the board aggro deck, it's certainly quite playable, right? Like, that's not really the deck I've been mostly playing. I've been doing this control combo deck, and here it's like not quite what you want. Here, I think the only tricolor card ends up being Joran the Skald King. That doesn't make this card bad. It just means it doesn't quite fit in the main archetype for why you would be running Eben in the first place. Transitus Shrine is basically just garbage. I don't know why Cyrodiil would want to run this. Usually, emptying your hand is not the main problem in aggro decks. Generally, aggro decks will empty their hands, so you don't need to empty your hand even faster. I mean, it can be nice, but are you going to use a support slot and 3 mana to empty your hand faster when the main thing you want in a aggro token deck, which is, what you're going to probably be doing in Cyrodiil unless you're doing, control. And you definitely don't run it in control. Like, the only way you would activate this is with aggro tokens, and aggro tokens doesn't want it. So why does this card exist? I don't know. Master of Incunabala, I can't even say it. The main problem here, I think, is the lack of really interesting red expertise activations. Like, if you look at all the expertise, you're going to have Vaniscribe, which is great. Mage's Guild Conjurer, which I haven't experimented with that much personally. I probably should, but I think that this is another reason that you'd want to be doing this combo. Renowned Instructor, I guess. Honestly, I'm kind of debating whether this is actually worth it. Like, Guildsworn Revitalizer, basically just as, like, stability. Like, look at how much board stability this has, right? And if you're in kind of this, like, mid-range deck, like, this has the stat line of a Hive Defender, right? Like, at first you're like, oh, is expertise really worth it? And you put the expertise out of your mind for a moment, and you're like, this is a Hive Defender that functionally has guard, right? Because of Guildsworn Revitalizer. If Guildsworn Revitalizer is on the board, most of the time, your opponent doesn't really want to get rid of it because, it's 5 life and it's, annoying. It's 5 life you would otherwise be doing. Oh, thank you for the follow, Reaper. But this is a 3/6 stat line for 4 mana that, with Guildsworn Revitalizer is healing you for 6. Basically, if you're in a kind of mid-range or aggro race, this is something that can set you ahead. And so I think this is one of the reasons you would actually be running Guildsworn is Incunabala with Guildsworn Revitalizer. Maybe Renowned Instructor, probably Renowned Instructor at that point actually, but like I think people try to just like automatically throw these cards in, and I'm not sure they're actually totally correct. Like Revitalizer on its own makes Master of Incunabala worth it. Especially, like, the problem is, like, Venice's Scribe. I feel like this card you actually generally want to be running in, like, a assassin deck. So, I don't think it's that essential in Guildsworn, but you might also still be running Venice's Scribe. It's, like, debatable. Probably Mage's Guild Conjurer, Guildsworn Revitalizer. And then I haven't really seen that much in the way of Fighter's Guild Berserker, right? Because I think the idea of this deck is you're basically totally dominating the board and really stabilizing, right? Like, I think a lot of the time what you can have a hard time with in these, like, mid-range aggro decks is, stabilizing and not just losing because the opponent won the race. So this is, like, a slightly slower aggro archetype that still works pretty well. And you can also make it work in control if you wanted to. And that's the nice thing. It's a very versatile card. It's a very versatile package. Just those 2 cards, right? It's all you need. Mournhold Taskmaster, like, this is basically like a veteran tribal deck that I don't really like, because I don't think veteran has enough to really make it worth it. Like, yes, Taskmaster with Forerunner of the Pact can be really nice when you get the combo down and it doesn't get immediately removed. That's not that often. Like, the way it would work, if it was going to work, it would be actually with, I think, your other bro down here at the end of the threes is your Withered Hand Cultist, right? You wouldn't actually be running your opponent's actions cost more. You'd throw down the Withered Hand Cultist on 3, then you probably run your first and then you would drop your Mournhold Taskmaster on 4, and then you could come in with your Forerunner of the Pact with charge at that point, right? And so then kind of that progression is ideally what would allow you to actually get some value out of Mournhold. Because the problem is that otherwise, most of the time, it just gets removed immediately, right? Jorn is great. He's just basically going to be an auto-include in every single deck here. You would never not include him because he's great. I did at first kind of wonder, like, oh, could he maybe be, like, a little bit better? Like, you know, is it almost a problem that he's kind of competing with the big bad guy, the Sower of Revenge, right? Like, if you're running Sower, you know, do you want to just be in Warrior? Do you just want to run Sower and not actually run Joran and have that extra consistently if that's what you're trying to do? And you do think about that a little bit. But I think that Joran works in Ebb and Control in a way that Sower kind of doesn't, right? Like, Sower could work in this deck. I've thought about it sometimes. The problem is that, like, the way Ebb and Control generally wants to work is you kind of want to run your opponent out of cards. You want to get such a totally dominating board presence that there's just no way they can possibly get back in the game, and your opponent concedes, right? You don't actually kill them in this deck. You never deal lethal. Like, 9 out of 10 games, your opponent concedes because they recognize they have lost. Whereas Sower is the type of card where you're running where you kind of want to win the race. You just want to deal the maximum damage as quickly as possible. Whereas in Ebb and Control, Sower kind of doesn't work as well because you end up drawing your opponent cards, which risks, like if you're against a Prophecy Battle Mage, that risks having them pull a Prophecy, and then, if you don't get that board position that can just hold the board, then you end up losing. So I don't think Sower is wrong exactly in Ebb and Control, but I haven't been running him in my most recent version. And this is what I cleared rank 1 with and actually hit Legend, so I know this deck is functional. So yeah, Mournhold I think is playable, but I don't think he's like the main deck right now is running him. Joran is definitely auto-including basically every deck. Aaron's Chosen? I don't think Dominion has actually been running this as much as you'd think. It seems a little bit understated, right? Like, if you're not getting the Empower off, it's kind of bad. And I think that in token decks, sometimes you do end up fighting for board. Like, when you are winning the game, this card is great, and you're probably going to win really well. But if you are struggling to, like, get back in the game against a control deck, this card is not going to help you. And in that respect, I don't think it's that great. Covenant Masterpiece is, like, in your discard combo decks, obviously a pretty cool option. I don't see it running universally, but certainly I've seen some decks run it. And Emmerich is, like, your auto-include, and, like, well, honestly, he is not quite auto-include in Daggerfall. But he will frequently be included in Daggerfall. In terms of cards I haven't experimented with personally, I saw one person mess up and actually not get the activation off with Vanis. Or what they did is they put Vanis on the board, then they swung, hit a Prophecy, and then I lightning bolted him to death. It was kind of funny. Obviously, if he gets off, he's great. But in terms of card draw, like, the question you have to ask yourself when you're thinking about including Vanis is how much is 3 cards worth? Because it's the 3 cards that really is what makes this like such an amazing card, right? Like draw 3. That's basically like 3/3 draw 3 is what you want here. The 3 damage is like fine, sure. Like remove a minion too. I'm sure that's it's also important, but like draw 3 is the main thing that you want. But there's so many other draw mechanics, right? Like you're already in Guildsworn, you're already running your Guildsworn apprentice, right? And so you won't necessarily be hurting that much for card draw. And if you need card draw on turn 11 or maybe turn 12, if you need to use a mana to get the expertise off, it's not really that good. Certainly in a slow control, this is for your control Guildsworn, which I think is probably the weaker version of Guildsworn. It can be okay, but I don't really think so, because you're going to be competing if you're in a control matchup. Like you're going to be competing with things like Ebon Control, and things like Ebon Control are going to have your Brotherhood Sanctuary and Cicero popping out and drawing, like doing your Unstoppable Rage with Cicero, wiping an entire lane, drawing, your entire hand, drawing 10 cards half the time. And you compare that to, like, basically a simple combo, makes it so that I don't really feel like, I haven't crafted him yet is basically what this comes down to. And I haven't crafted him yet for a reason, because I haven't, even in a control Guildsworn deck, I haven't been like, oh, I definitely need Vanis Galarian. Aerin, I probably should craft. I probably should have crafted her already. There's really no reason not to run her. Basically, the only reason is that I haven't really been running that much Aldmeri Dominion. But that is something I'll probably do relatively soon. So I do think Aerin is great. I think that the effect is fine. I think she's a little bit expensive. Certainly she's 3 mana more than the other Aerin, and for being another way to get actions back from your discard pile. But she has the Drain, and Drain is really important, so definitely playable. Tharn? So the problem with Tharn is not that she's bad, it's that she's kind of, she has the wrong attack value. And what I mean by that is that your other option at the same cost is General Tullius. And maybe you're just going to run both, right? Yeah, sure, why not just run both? I think that's probably what you'd end up doing. Like, if you're running Clivia Tharn, you're probably just running Clivia Tharn and General Tullius, and you're not really thinking about it. And in that respect, she's fine. But I kind of feel like the thing about Clivia Tharn is that you need to be in Cyrodiil. And if you're running aggro tokens, do you want to be in Cyrodiil is kind of the big question for me. Like, what are the benefits of being a token deck in Cyrodiil over being a token deck in any other combination of colors, such as just straight up Spellsword, right? Like, if you're running an aggro Spellsword deck, then you're going General Tullius, and you're 3 times Odinir and Necromancer, and you're going to say, every time General Tullius dies, I'm going to respawn him, right? I can just respawn General Tullius over and over and over again, in a way that you can't for Clivia Tharn. So, in that respect, I think that if you're doing an aggro token deck, you're very likely to just be better off in Spellsword rather than in Tricolor. And so it's more like a general overall problem that I'm just not sure that Token Cyrodiil is the best aggro token deck. Even though, I mean, certainly there are some new cool options for it, right? Like, if you're running token aggro decks, you're running it more for Empire Recruiter in my mind, rather than for Clivia Tharn. I'm trying to think of what other combo pieces you would put in this deck that makes it worth it. Like, what are the tokens you want? Like, if you're in green, your main token is going to be the goblins, right? But if you're doing goblins, you want to basically be a mono green deck. You definitely don't want to be tricolor. So you're not running the green here. Didn't I make one of these decks? And I can't even remember like what I put in it. I made a Highlander Cyrodiil deck, which just wasn't very good. I did play it a few times though. I tried Cyrodiil Control, but I didn't feel the need to craft some of the legends for it. Like, okay, you get Pawnbroker, you can run Inspiring Soldier, you get your Thieves Guild recruit, I guess Gambler. I don't know. I run a lot of different token decks, and I don't think this one is particularly good. I think it's definitely playable, because every token deck basically is playable right now. Like, you can't make a token deck in a combination of colors and say it's bad. or say that the colors are bad, right? Like, you can make tokens in any combination of colors, and it will probably win you games. So this is, like, a good deck that I just don't think is the best version of token aggro. Which doesn't make it bad. It just means, like, if you're trying to give an objective impression of the card, I'm kind of like, doesn't seem necessary. But I think a lot of these new combinations, I think Aldmeri Dominion, these, like, combo Aldmeri decks are generally doing pretty good. What else are they even running? Yeah, with, like, Aaron. Like, I haven't done this deck that much, so I haven't played with this card that much personally. But I've played against a fair number of Aldmeri Dominion decks, and this card is strong. I can tell you from playing on the receiving end. I would say this deck is strong because of this card. This deck is strong because of this card. This guy's fine, I guess. This is probably playable. She's really strong. So I think that these new tricolors are kind of interesting. I think that the main new feature of this expansion really is Joran. Not Joran because of the card in particular, but Joran in terms of Ebonheart Pact, because I think that this combo control deck is really the main new fun thing to do in this game right now. Like, I feel like coming back to this game after I basically took a year off and barely touched this game. Like, I was ranked 12 because my rank had just degenerated so much. And coming back and saying, okay, like, I feel like you could always try to make Night Talon Lord Unstoppable Rage combo decks, but I think that Ebon Control makes it so much more interesting because of the combinations you can do with Falkreath Defiler leading up into Night Talon Lord. It's just a fun deck to play. I'm not sure it's actually tier 1. I think that ultimately the problem this deck has is against early aggro. Like, I keep playing with different tools to deal with aggro. I feel like for a combo deck, it ends up curving out like relatively low. But it's a fun deck to play. Every now and then you just win with Night Mother because people run out of support removals, and that's really fun too. Finding the right combination of the high end ended up being really hard. Like, I know a lot of people are running, like, you probably look at this deck and you're like, why on earth are you not running Tazcad? Like, don't you just always run Tazcad in this deck? And I'm like, well, I ended up cutting him. Certainly you can make a strong argument that Tazcad should be in this deck, and, you know, maybe he should be. But I feel like there's just so many other things that I need more. Like, you need Red Brahmin sometimes. Like, sometimes Red Brahmin is in your graveyard and you just need to summon him to stabilize a few turns with your Falkreath Defiler combos just to get to the point that you can set up the Night Talon Lord, at which point you basically just win the game and the opponent concedes. But it's fun. So, in summary, I basically feel like Red got almost nothing in this expansion. I feel like Blue got some cool new tools in Flamesinger, and mostly Flamesinger, really. I feel like it's mostly this card that makes Blue interesting to play now, in combination with the new combos like Guildsworn. Yellow got Guildsworn Revitalizer, and in combination with that, Master of the Incunabala, which I think is really just the most interesting card from this group. So basically, I feel like blue got one good new card, just unequivocally good new card. Yellow got one new good card, but this card is basically only functional in Guildsworn. So I feel like yellow, in terms of overall versatility, didn't really get that much. Green got Oathman for the aggro decks here. Inspiring Soldier, which I think is still debatable in the token aggro decks. Spoils of War, which is going in like a lot of different variations of Market Archer. And Saya Sahan, which is actually I think this is my personal favorite card from the expansion in terms of just being an individual card and not being the archetype enabler that is Joran. Purple, I talked about Poison Dagger a lot, but that's like not the card from this color. Really, I think Empire Oathman and this combination of aggro decks, just, you know, if you want to experiment with this token aggro deck, that's pretty good. And I think that's basically each color got like one new playable card. The thing is, though, that I do kind of feel like the only new exciting archetype is Ebonheart Pact. Like, Dominion Battle Reeve it looks like a fun deck to play, but I feel like it's still basically the same archetype that you would be seeing in an Assassin deck, just with a little bit of different stuff. Guildsworn, I think, is still basically either going to be an aggro or control deck. I don't feel like the archetypes are that different. I feel like the only deck that really feels different to me is Joran's deck. So in that regard, Joran is kind of the most interesting card, just because enabling Ebonheart Pact decks is the most satisfying of anything in the expansion. So that's kind of where I'm at with this expansion. Kind of ended up talking for a little bit longer on that than I thought I would. I don't know. Should I do... Of course, I'm only, I'm like Legend 650 right now, but I've just, I played the 5 different decks. I think on that point, I think that the reason I kind of wanted to make this, or have this discussion, was that I felt like I went through Lalu, and I tried to make a new Lalu deck and just found nothing from the new set worth adding, so I was like, okay, well, what actually are these new cards offering? So I made some different colors. I made a Smork deck, which runs, as far as I can tell, nothing from the new set. That even though there are orcs, they are not orcs that you would run in a Smork deck, thus making them not playable. Yeah, there's just nothing. There's nothing from the new set that you would run in this orc factional deck. Just kind of disappointing. For rank 3, I ran Debuff Scout, and this is actually the first time I ran any card from the new set, and that was Sai Sahan, who I think is just quite playable. At rank 2, I was trying to make blue work, because I felt like I had been playing the other colors' aggro decks. I played 2 aggro decks, heavy on red, and then I played a Scout, basically a mid-range deck. And I hadn't played any blue and actually been successful with it. So this is the first blue deck I really actually had success with. And this also runs absolutely no cards from the new expansion. So these are all decks I made this expansion, but I was just trying to make decks that would win, and the new expansion cards weren't really getting me there until I was like, no, I'm gonna make some new expansion cards work. So I put in Joran, and even though there's not a ton of cards from the new expansion in here, it has Joran, and it's only possible to be in this set of colors with Joran. So that's where we're at. That's why I say Joran is basically the most interesting card in the expansion, even though my personal favorite card to run is Sai Sahan. It's just a nice looking card. You got that super sweet beard, cool armor. Love the sword. The effect is great. And he hits for 6 damage, which means you're, you know, if he doesn't get removed, which actually will be more often than you think, then he can hit for lethal. It's pretty cool. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and take a break and get a drink. But thanks for watching, and enjoy your Legends.